Looks at the audience.
Well, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to today's Fab Friday. It's called Close Encounters of a Black Bear Kind. My name is Jane Yokoyama, and I'm on the Fab Friday committee. We have really been looking forward to this presentation for over a year, and I'm really happy that Tanya can do it today. As you saw on the first screen, you can submit your answers under the Q&A section. You can do it at any time, but there will be stopping points where we can answer them. Also want to remind you that the next Fab Friday session is on November 6th. Topic is what the 2020 election results could mean. And you can register either through a link on the newsletter or our OLLI website. And also, if you have any questions or suggestions for topics and speakers, the Fab Friday committee would love to hear from you. So now it's my pleasure to introduce Tanya Poole. She's the Regional Education Specialist for the North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission. She's worked there for 16 years, and her job has her covering over 30 counties in Western North Carolina. Tanya has degrees from Western Carolina University and Monterey College. Today, she will discuss the natural history of black bears here in Western North Carolina and how we can safely live with them. She will also talk about the Bearwise initiative and what's being done on the urban bear population. So thank you, Tanya. I'll turn it over to you.
Good morning, everybody. I'm going to share my screen here and we'll get started. As she mentioned, you have a Q&A box and questions can go there. And we'll try this one more time. There we go. Jane, can you see that screen?
That looks great.
Perfect, thank you. All right, so as she mentioned, I'm Tanya Poole. I'm the Mountain Region Education Specialist for the North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission. If you're not sure who the Wildlife Resources Commission is, we are the agency that manages hunting and fishing and trapping in North Carolina. And we also manage non-game as well. So game animals are the ones that you can hunt and fish and trap. Non-game is everything else. Mussels, elk, bats, birds, etc. And our job as an agency is to make sure that if animals are animals that you can use as a resource for hunting and fishing, then we are maintaining those populations for that reason. But also we are trying to keep native animals native and thriving and doing well. So we work with landowners, we protect habitat for wildlife, improve habitat, work with lots of other public landowners, etc. So today we're going to be talking about bears, but if you have questions related to what the commission does, I can answer those later on. You'll have my email address as well. So let's get started. I'm going to back up one slide and show you. You saw this as we were starting, and just so you know what this is, we have been testing bear-resistant trash cans and working on how to get bear-resistant trash cans available to the Asheville area and surrounding area, which I will talk about a little later in this talk. But because I won't come back to this specific video, this is Uno from the Nature Center and Western North Carolina Nature Center. And he agreed to be our test subject. So we brought out a variety of cans. This has been a couple of years ago now, and let him test them out to see if he could get into them. So that's what that video is all about. So the plan today is to break this presentation up into 3 sections. I'm first going to talk about the biology of black bears and just kind of make sure we're all on the same page about what black bears are doing in each of the seasons and what they eat, where they live, etc. Because then as we move into coexisting with black bears, the things that I'm going to suggest that help with coexisting with black bears will make more sense when you know how black bears are supposed to be behaving. You can also start to make choices on your own when you see black bears as to whether that is a behavior that is normal and okay, or whether it's a behavior that you need to try and stop or get some intervention to stop. And then the last couple of slides are just to give you a quick update on the urban suburban bear study that's been going on in Asheville. I will take a pause in between each of those sections, and Jane can help me go through the Q&A questions. And in that box, if there are any questions, we can answer those as you go along. So you don't have to wait till the very, very end of the presentation to get your questions answered. So physical characteristics, there are 8 black bears in the world. 8 species of bears in the world. And black bears kind of fall right in the middle as a medium-sized bear. They have strong curved claws for climbing and digging, not as long as a grizzly bear's, and that's one of the reasons grizzly bears are not good climbers. But they have the perfect length for being able to dig, but also be able to climb trees. And they get those claws pretty quick. So even really tiny young bears, just a couple of months old, already have really long nails, because climbing a tree is their first line of defense to get away from something. And they learn that very quickly out of the den. They have decent vision. It's similar to ours. In the animal world, it's not the best vision by far, but they do have a really good sense of smell and an amazing sense of hearing. And those are certainly more tuned into the world around them. They catch things much quicker by their sense of smell and hearing than by their vision. So just sometimes that is why you see them behaving a certain way, like standing on 2 legs and trying to look around. It's not an aggressive thing. It's trying to see better. Their weight ranges from 150, 200 pounds for a female to a little over 300 pounds or so for males. And those weights vary between our mountain bears and our coastal bears. If you think about the seasons and the food availability and the habitat, our coastal bears have a longer growing season, have access to a lot more agricultural crops, and they don't have to work as hard to get around. So they tend to be a little bit heavier on average. That's why these averages are broken out between coastal and mountains. And the world record black bear is from Craven County in North Carolina, and it was 880 pounds. If you can even imagine an 880 pound bear, he was a monster. His belly was dragging the ground. But that goes to show you, if the food is there, they will get it and they will just continue to eat. He was living outside of a pig farm, and this was 96 or so, and he was 98. He was able to just hang outside of this farm, wait for the farmer to bury pigs if they passed away when they were not harvesting them specifically, and he was able to go in and dig them up. Pigs cannot be buried like that anymore, so bears wouldn't have access to pigs that they once had, but that's how this one got so big. We estimate somewhere around 20,000 bears across the state. Our Piedmont population is very, very low, and we hope it stays that way. But we have somewhere between 6,000 and 7,000 or so in the mountains, and closer to 12 or 13,000 at the coast. And this is the black bear range map. If you can hopefully see clearly on your screen, back in the 70s, there was an estimated maybe 800 bears in the state. And that's the purple. Obviously, it was not once like that, but it got to be that way because there was overhunting and lots of things were not going well. And so our agency developed a hunting season, developed bear sanctuaries, and really started working hard on how to help our black bears, and it has worked really, really well. Black bears will be, if anywhere we let them, if they can find food and enough habitat. In the Piedmont, black bears we'll come through there and we'll talk later about why that might be. But ideally, it's too populated, too densely populated, too busy in general for bears to be there and thrive and do well. So our goal as an agency in our black bear management plan is to not allow that population in the Piedmont to increase. We want to keep our bears to the mountains and the coast where we have lots of safe, fantastic habitat for them to live in. Oh, and this range map gets updated about every 10 years. So at some point, you know, COVID has thrown everything off, but at some point in this year or next year, we should have a new range map. It probably won't be significantly different than this one, but do know that there's a new one coming out. So naturally, what are black bears eating? In North Carolina, we have such amazing habitat. Our bears can really thrive on plant material. There's enough in all the seasons that they are eating, meaning that they are not eating in most of the winter time in the mountains, especially. But in the spring, summer, and fall, they have lots of food to choose from, so they don't have to hunt. They can hunt. They can run about 35 miles an hour and could track something down if they need to, but they tend to not have to do that. So they are eating certainly dead meat, a dead animal carry on the side of a road or in the woods or wherever. They're getting a lot of protein from specific plants and larvae that they can dig up in logs and in the ground, etc. But that small portion there, 3% or so, is animals. Everything else is plants. We put corn on here because it is worth noting, I said it just a second ago, but at the coast, we grow a lot of wheat and corn, soybeans, sweet potatoes, etc. And those farms tend to be very large. And there are less houses on, 100 acres than there would be in the mountains. So bears can maneuver through those fields and eat just like deer and lots of other animals and never come in contact with people, but it does make up a percentage of their diet. And nuts in the fall are crucial for bears being able to put on enough weight to survive the winter. Other animals depend on those nuts as well for the same reason. And bears are considered habitat generalists, meaning that they can pretty much live anywhere as long as they can more or less be left alone if they're still a wild bear and not used to people. They can range 250 square kilometers, but they don't have to. And we are learning with the urban suburban bear study that they are tolerating a much, much smaller home range if they are getting the food they need and a place to shelter. But they do use corridors. And here in the mountains, that's a real obvious thing. They use the trails that we use. Why blaze a new trail when you can just walk through one that's already made and easy to get around? So in Montreat, in Asheville, in a lot of places that kind of sit in coves, we see that bears will move down the ridge tops into those coves and into those neighborhoods pretty easily, and they'll use the same paths all the time. And in that urban suburban bear study, we'll talk about how close they are living to people pretty much year round or pretty close to it. That's not what we want. We want them to have a lot of wild spaces. That's a much better place for them to be. But being a habitat generalist is a great thing for an animal. Of course, they do better when they are flexible. When species are very specific about a certain food source or a certain habitat, obviously there's a lot of less flexibility there, and they tend to have smaller numbers, not always do as well. They breed between June and August. So like a lot of animals, that's a great time for food. It's plentiful, the weather's good, it's easy to get around. And that is when males and females are interacting the most. Females can breed with multiple males. So even in the same litter, those cubs can have different dads. And then those cubs are born in January, early February. It's something called delayed implantation because their actual gestation period is not from June or August, June, July, or August to February. It's actually just from November to January or February, about 8 weeks. When the female mates with the male, those eggs get fertilized, but then they do not develop. They just sort of go into diapause. They just kind of hang out, not developing in the female. And in about November, when she has put on enough weight in the fall to get ready to den, her body knows whether she is healthy enough to give birth to cubs and feed them during winter denning, or whether she isn't. And she could have 5 fertilized eggs and 1 implant in the uterine wall and develop, or all 5, or some combination thereof, or reabsorb all of those eggs. And she doesn't deliver any babies. So it's a pretty amazing strategy to breed when the food is at its best and traveling is at its easiest. But giving birth to cubs in the fall when she's needing to put on weight would be counterproductive. She would be nursing and losing a lot of weight while she's trying to put on weight. So black bears just delay that implantation of the eggs until a more opportune time. And then she gives birth in the winter when she's denning and her cubs are protected because she's in a den. They'll stay with her for a whole year and a half almost. And then that next spring, they move off on their own. When black bears are denning, a lot of people say they're not true hibernators. It's called torpor. It's called winter denning. It's winter sleep. There are 1,000 names. We tend to, even within our agency, not everyone agrees on the same term, but the gist is that for black bears, their body temperature only drops a little bit. So from about 100 to upper 80s. Where other hibernators like groundhogs and squirrels and bats, their body temperature drops to just above freezing. So that's a major physiological difference in how they handle hibernating or winter denning. But black bears will slow everything down, their metabolism, their heart rate, breathing, everything, just breathing a couple of times a minute. And that is saving energy. So they can wake up whenever they feel like it. And they often do in the wintertime. Even in the mountains, we see bears off and on all winter. But you will not likely see a pregnant female or a female with cubs. They will go into the den the earliest, even as early as November, and they will come out as late as March or April. They're trying to protect themselves and protect those cubs for as long as possible. But a single female or a male, because they do not stay together in the den, they will, maybe go in even later, closer to December, could come out as early as February. For the other hibernators that are cooling down into the 40s or 50s, waking up is less easy. So they have to physically warm themselves back up and then, move around. They have to refuel because they're burning a lot of energy warming up. They go to the bathroom, et cetera. They cool back down, and that's an off and on thing all winter. So there's just a little bit of difference, some major differences physiologically. Where do they den? We always get asked, and actually it's not a cave. So I grew up thinking bears denned in caves, probably because of books and movies, whatever. But if you think about what a bear would need for a den, if they are wanting to stay warm, not have to burn any more energy than they absolutely have to, and be protected from the weather, they are going to try to find a small, warm space. And so from the Urban Suburban Bear Study in Asheville, they figured out that 67 of the bears that they were tracking, this was the first phase of the study, 67 of them were in ground dens. And that can be just trees turned over and a bunch of limbs and things just start to pile up there. They can den under that. It can be rock outcroppings where we have big boulders and underneath starts to erode away. They can climb in there. but it can also be tree dens. So any hollowed out trees, they can climb up in there, or climbing through the bottom. Wherever it's rotting, they can get in there and be protected. And even front porches. It's not ideal, but there were 3 who hibernated, probably in a seasonal house that was not inhabited by humans. I see a couple of questions. I'm interested to know if black bears have any predators. Oh, I should have mentioned that. So really the only predator for black bears when cubs are small, certainly they are the most susceptible. And that can be larger animals, but most in North Carolina, we don't really have any larger animals that would likely go after a cub because the mom is close by, but a male bear will. So the biggest predator for cubs is another male bear, because if the mom has cubs, she will not go into estrus to be able to breed again. She will wait another year or 2 before she comes into estrus again, because she's taking care of those cubs. If a male kills those cubs or runs them off, then she will go into estrus and he could breed with her. So that's the biggest predator besides humans. And are black bears immune to stings? Pretty much. I mean, it can hurt when they sting them on a soft place like a lip or their mouth that isn't covered in fur, but for the most part, they're pretty immune to it. They might be irritated by that, but they don't really care that much. They're going in for the larvae in beehives and ant mounds, etc., and they seem to tolerate the stings pretty well. So I mentioned that cubs will stay with a mom for 1.5 years. And they're very similar to us in that the mother will nurse them, eventually start weaning them through the summertime as she teaches them what foods are okay to eat. And then that next fall, the cubs need to put on weight to get ready for the winter, just like she does, but they'll stay with her that winter. And the cubs will go through the winter, typically not nursing at that point, but just staying in the den with the mom. And then that next spring, they move off on their own. And there really isn't a territory issue with females. That's similar for a lot of animals. It doesn't really matter. So often you'll see female cubs that don't go far from their mom's home range, but males do need to disperse. That's kind of a genetics thing. As bears get older, there seems to be less of they don't know that other bear is their son. There seems to not be this natural distancing. So if you get your son out of the area, you're not going to breed with him later, basically. So males will disperse, pretty far. And these are almost always the bears that end up in the really stupid places, like the middle of Raleigh on NC State's campus, or Winston-Salem, or Charlotte, or Greenville, or just, in the middle of Asheville, because they're trying to find an area where they don't smell another male bear. And they don't know that a town is a dangerous place. They just know that they're heading in an area that doesn't smell like another bigger male. And I mentioned to you that very early on, they climb trees when they get scared, and that becomes kind of a life response, even as an adult. And so they will kind of walk into town unknowingly, and then when all the ruckus starts, people see them, cars, etc. They get scared, and they usually end up a tree or a light pole or somewhere instead of turning around and getting back out of town. So it's not always the case, but most of the time it is. And someone mentioned the average size of a cub when they are roaming on their own. So they're at 1.5 years. They're somewhere around 100 pounds, 80 to 100 pounds typically when they're on their own. And how long are they nursing for? They're born in January, February, and they are nursing through the summer typically, but she's weaning them off. So 6 months, somewhere in there. They have seen weird things happen, like a female kind of loses track of a cub and she doesn't see it for a while. And then she comes into estrus and breeds, but then she meets back up with her cub, and she'll end up having a winter where she has brand new cubs and a year cub. And in that case, that year cub tends to take advantage of nursing. So, so it can happen where they nurse a little bit longer, but typically it's just through that summer. So I've been answering a few questions as they pop up, but I also want to just take a moment before I switch over to black bear human conflict and see if there are any other questions that you guys have just about general black bear life history before we switch over. And I'll give it just a second. How long do they live? It can be anywhere from 5 years or so to 20. Typically 3, 5, 7 years is pretty average in the wild. And bears that live closer to 20 are ones that are often in zoos and nature centers and are living the high life. What is the range of black bears in the US? Oh, that's a really good question. They are found in a lot of states. The southeastern states, most of the southeastern states have some range of bears, and there are some states in the Midwest that don't have bears. A lot of the northwestern states do have black bears. So that's not a very clear answer, but a lot of states do. A lot of our northeastern states have smaller populations of black bears. In the southeast and really in the East Coast, North Carolina has one of the largest populations of black bears. And let me move my screen over here. I've read that everything a bear does is related to food, and it's a good way to evaluate what one will do when you encounter it. They are very, very food driven, and I'm going to mention that here in this next section. Yes, most everything has to do with food for a black bear. And of course, feeling safe, that is going to make them react if they feel like they're under attack or, being cornered. And protecting young, that's also a potential, you're going to get a reaction if you're interfering with their young. Does a female use the same den every year? Not necessarily. They just kind of den wherever. They don't have any territorialness about using the same den. What are reasons for death? Here in North Carolina, and I would say it's pretty similar in black bear ranges everywhere. Lots of natural causes, just things you don't know why an animal died, but we get a lot of, in North Carolina, we get a lot of accidents by car. We get a lot of bears hit by car. Through 40 in the gorge headed to Tennessee between Haywood County and the gorge, they're kind of funneled right there. And so we have a lot of bears hit by cars there. And also at the coast, I think it's 64 is the highway. There are a lot of accidents there by cars as well, just like deer. And hunting season. How old are they when they first mate? 2 years old, typically. And how did they stay cool in the summertime with all that fur? They stay in the shade. They spend time, they can swim, so they get wet. And they just pretty much are lazy. They kind of, when it's really hot, they just sort of hunker down and try not to waste a lot of energy. But our black bears do really well in woods. That's why our black bears tend to be black. There are black bears that are brown or blonde or cinnamon colored, depending on the habitat that they're in. But our bears love swamps and woods and places that they can just stay hidden and stay out of the sun. When a bear dies, what happens to it if humans know about it? When a bear dies, what happens to it if humans know about it? I might need a little more on that one. If we know a bear has died, I mean, really, there's not necessarily anything you have to do about it unless you think there's something wrong with the way that it died. I'm not sure if that's what you're asking or not. Do we have more bears at this time than we did in the past? Absolutely. Yes, a lot more. I mentioned back in the 70s, we thought we only had about 800 in the state, and now we have over 20,000. So a whole lot more. Are bears more docile than in other areas? Oops. Hang on one second. Sorry, I messed up my screen. In other areas such as out west or Canada, you do hear more attack stories in Canada, potentially even out west. Part of that is because a lot of those habitats are also, black bears are also living in the same habitat as grizzly bears, or even mountain lions and lots of other large predators. And so they tend to have to be more aggressive. Here in North Carolina and some of our eastern states, there really aren't big predators for black bears, and they're not competing with really any other large mammals for the most part. And so docile is, I wouldn't say that means you can go up and hug them, but you definitely do tend to see that they shy away from, a fight or a potential fight much quicker than black bears in places where they are also living with grizzly bears. Would it be typical to see bears in the same general place and time day after day? They do stick to daily patterns, especially if those daily patterns provide good food sources. Yep, it's all about the food. Are they interested in vegetable compost? Yes. We tend to see, we'll talk about it here in these next group of slides. There are other food choices that maybe rank higher. But if you're in an area where bears are coming and going, compost is going to be an issue too. If a ranger encounters a dead black bear, do you dispose of the body in some way? No, if it's in the woods, other animals can use it, eat on it, etc. So, I mean, unless it's out where people are and it just doesn't need to be there, it can just be left alone. And how are they disposed of? That just depends on what's going on. You know, if it's just a natural death out in the woods, it doesn't have to be disposed of. It can just be left. But if it is euthanized by the park or by wildlife or something else because of a safety issue or something else going on, the Wildlife Resources Commission has a place that we can bury animals away from everybody. And how do we know this? Collaring. Yes, collaring. And we're going to look at that in the bear study at the end. We do collar bears and track them. Yep, not all, but a good number of them. Couple more, and then I'm going to keep going. Can they contract rabies? They are a mammal, so they could, like any other animal, any other mammal. Most mammals can contract rabies. Doesn't often happen. It has happened. And if it dies in a residential area, does Fish and Game take it away? It could be that Fish and Game takes it away. Yes, if it is in your yard and you don't want it in your yard, you don't have a place to drag it to the woods or something, and it just died of natural causes, then you could get help with that. Yep. And the bear hunting culture, I'm going to come back to that one because we can talk about it with the survey, with the research at the end. And then we're going to talk, a couple of these have to do with conflict. So I am going to go on. We'll keep coming back to this and come back to these questions. Okay. Oops. So bear-human conflict. Someone asked the question, and pretty much it stands true. Conflict occurs because bears get access to food. They are very food driven. That is the way their world is made up. They don't eat in the wintertime. Come spring, they are hungry. They haven't eaten for potentially 6 months. That's not the case here in North Carolina typically, but in northern climates, the winter is harsh enough that food has, grass plants have died back and they don't have food available to them. The cold is not what makes an animal specifically go into a hibernation or a torpor. It's not the weather. It could be the summer torpor for some animals. It's the lack of resources. So if there is no food available, and in the wintertime for us, a lot of food has died back at that point where they can't get enough food to sustain the calories they need daily, which for bears in the spring and summer, it can be anywhere from about 5,000 to 8,000 calories a day. And in the fall, it gets closer to 20,000 to put on that weight. They need 20,000 every day. So it's all about the food. They're in the spring, they're catching up from not eating. In the summer, they're just kind of getting into the sweet spot of not losing calories anymore and getting enough food to gain weight. And then in fall, it is around the clock eating to put on enough weight for the winter. So what happens, because they are naturally that food driven, when they get access to an amazing food source like our bird feeders or trash cans or dog food, etc., they are not going to go back out into the woods and have to graze on berries. They're going to sit on that food source when it is that good. It's going to be worth it to them to change their mindset about what is scary or annoying because the food source is better. So the food always outweighs the being harassed for a black bear. And that means that when we have bears come into town, you know, one time is a fluke, but if they can get it a second time or, you know, a third time, they're done. They're not going back out to the woods. And it's going to be pretty difficult for you to run them back off into the woods. And then they get really tolerant of people and they start acting like a totally different animal. We can't gauge what their reaction to things are going to be anymore because they're not acting like a wild bear anymore. So here's a short video, just a couple seconds long, of bears getting into some bird feed in Asheville. So that's a bluff charge. And he could absolutely care less that there are people, you know, 10 feet from him. He's being pretty tolerant. He could have easily run her over, right? I mean, let's just be honest. But he chose not to. He's showing some restraint, but he's got that whole trash can full, it looks like, of bird seed. And it is worth it to him to be harassed to be able to continue eating that bird seed. And to give you an idea, a typical bird feeder that holds like 7 pounds or so of seed, that's pretty average, can have 12 to 20,000 calories in it, just in one bird feeder. So if in the summertime, spring, summertime, they only need 5,000 to 8,000 calories and they hit one bird feeder, I mean, they've just hit the jackpot. So there's no reason for them to leave. Why would you? If somebody is going to bring me a pizza and cake every day and lay it in front of me and I don't have to move to eat it, I'm not going to probably go fix a salad in my kitchen if it's brought to me, right? So bears are no different. But here is a reaction of a bear that hasn't quite gotten his food driven yet. You'll hear their reactions, the people.
You shan't all the bears here. Let me go in your office because he might come after me.
Get down! Right now! Go! No! No! Down!
You scared him.
I love it. She is not putting up with anything. And that would not happen. That bear would not run off just by her shouting if he was not still mostly a wild bear. So, you know, he's pretty comfortable walking around. Maybe this was his first time at a house. Maybe it was the second or third time, but he's not been getting food for long because just her yelling at him would not have sent him running otherwise. Probably a lot of you, if you're in Asheville or close by, are seeing bears that are sitting on people's porches in the middle of the day, and you could blow an air horn in their ear and they don't care because they know the food is worth it. So this is the reaction that we want out of bears. We live in an area where we have a lot of bears, so you're going to see them. That's not a bad thing. You might have a bear come through your property and he's just wandering around or she's just wandering around. That's not necessarily a problem. Even if it's in the middle of the city, it's not a great thing, but it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's their reaction to being scared that becomes the kind of trigger for, is this still a wild bear and we can run it off, or is this going to be a problem bear because he's getting food conditioned? So me switch slides here. Sometimes they freeze up a little bit on, there we go, on videos. So just to show you complaints wise and observations and complaints, we have an in-house system that is starting to help us decipher the calls that come in, but this is pretty much lumped. It's just the easy way to collect this data. So know that some of this is a bear won't leave my porch, and some of this is I've seen a bear in my neighborhood. You know, the range varies there. But in 2018 and 2019, you will see by district, and this is by Wildlife Resources Commission district, the number of complaints that come in related to bears. And just to give you an idea, District 1, 2, and 3 are on the far east coast of North Carolina. District 4, 5, 6, and 7, no, 4, 5, and 6 are in the Piedmont. And then 7, 8, and 9. 7 is the northwestern corner of the state. 8 is the central mountains, and District 9 is the southern mountains. So for 2018 and for 2019, and for quite a few years now, most the past probably 10 years, all the calls, or a majority of the calls that are coming in, all narrow down to District 9. And even those calls, the percentage is mostly Buncombe County for bear problems. So if you've never been anywhere else in the state, but you're in Buncombe County, know that nobody else is dealing with bears like you are. That's kind of a cool thing and not a cool thing at the same time, but I want you to take it seriously, that it is an issue in Buncombe County. And we are blessed to have the bears that we have in Western North Carolina and in the southern mountains, but we also have to take that responsibility extremely seriously. Okay, we are going to keep moving. I'm going to talk about BearWise next, and BearWise is going to be specifically about how to coexist with bears. So I will glance at the questions, but I will also know that some of these questions are going to get answered in the next section, because we're going to talk about what not to do on your property. Do they follow a water source like a creek? They basically will follow a path that's just easy. If the food along the creek is a good source of food, then they might follow a creek. In North Carolina, black bears don't have to eat a lot of fish because they have so many other resources, but they can. So they might go to a creek or fish or crayfish or something else, but they don't specifically follow water. They want to get to water, but they don't necessarily follow it. Are dogs considered bear food, and are bears afraid of dogs? Anything could be a food source, not humans because we're huge, but like small dogs, chickens, small things like that certainly could be considered a food source for a bear. If they're in a neighborhood and there's a lot of noise going on and it's still a wild bear, they're probably not going to go after it. But they should be afraid of dogs barking and yelling at them if they're still a wild bear and they've not gotten accustomed to being in town. I would suggest, though, that if you live in a neighborhood where you do regularly see bears, I would not leave any dogs outside on their own for any amount of time. If you don't see bears during the daytime, then maybe that's fine. I know a lot of people leave dogs out when they go to work. Just understand that even just being spooked, a bear could react. And so it might not even consider it a food source, but it might consider a dog a threat, and they have very long claws, and it could just be one swipe and they've really hurt or killed an animal. So I'm not gonna downplay the damage that a bear could do if it's feeling cornered or threatened. Why would they strip branches from trees and shrubs? They'll eat leaves. They can be marking, they can be bored. They like to climb trees and sleep in them. So it could be a number of reasons that they're stripping trees. We've seen them peel fruit trees like a down to a toothpick to get to the fruit. But even when there's not fruit, sometimes they're eating on the branches, chewing on the bark and things like that. And they're asking about staying in a den under like trees and shrubs and things, which we will talk about next, and some of the hazing you can do as a homeowner. And we'll also talk about nuisance behavior and how to deal with it. So it looks like some of these questions will come up next. And oh, but I see one about a cub. So if the mom dies, what happens to her cubs? There have been a couple of instances where, because it's near homes and people have noticed, cubs have been orphaned because maybe the mom's been hit by a car or something. And our biologists get called, and they typically watch them for a day or two, depending on how big the cubs are, because sometimes mom just might have gotten distracted and moved on somewhere, and then she comes back to her cubs. So we don't take them right away typically, but we have a couple of times taken cubs that are really, really small. Cubs of the year, sometimes they're called COY, C-O-Y, cubs of the year. They're pretty small, and when they come out of the den in April, they might be about 8 pounds. And they certainly, we have seen them survive on their own that small, but typically they don't do that well on their own that small. So we, the Wildlife Resources Commission does have a wildlife rehabber in the state that specifically rehabs bears. It's not public, and we don't tell people where that is, but a cubs could be taken there if necessary, and then be released in where our biologists decide is a good place for them to be released. But we have seen them survive on their own. Okay. And I think a lot of these are going to get covered next. There's a couple of questions about bear hunting, and I want to wait until we get to that bear research section to ask those questions towards the end. So remind me to come back to that. Okay. And are people trapping bears? Not in the same sense that they trap foxes or raccoons for the fur. They're too big. The commission traps them in a specialized trap. You'll see a picture that does not kill them. They're just contained. And so that we can collar them or check their health. But trapping in the sense of a hunting season, they're not trapped. They can be harvested in a hunting season, not a trapping season. Okay, so we're going to keep on trucking here. And mention to you Bearwise. So this is exciting. For many, many, many years, many states have been dealing with bears 50 and 60 years before we started really having issues with bears. And we've all quickly learned that it's hard to change bear behavior, but we can certainly change human behavior. And so Bearwise, Bear Smart, there are 1,000 logos that have something to do with how to coexist with bears. But we all have been saying things a little bit different. You know, it's pretty much the same, but it's not exactly the same. And that just makes it confusing to the public when they see a lot of different logos and the language is a little bit different. So a couple of years ago, the southeastern states, 13 or 15 states, got together and decided, why are we putting all of our resources into separate programs that basically need to say the same thing anyway? So Bearwise was formed, and it's going so well that we are looking at, the Fish and Wildlife agencies are looking at expanding Bearwise to the East Coast and potentially at some point, maybe even nationwide, because even though different states, there might be a few things that are a little bit different, pretty much when it comes to bears and black bears specifically, our behavior needs to be the same, whether we're here or Colorado or Maine. So the nice thing about that is that hopefully, as people move or travel for vacation, you don't have to research before you go to, you know, your mountain cabin for vacation or your summer lake house or camping or whatever the case might be. You don't have to necessarily do a lot of research before you go to know about bears. If you don't do that and you get there and you see a Bearwise logo like this, then you'll know, oh, well, at home, we have to do this. It's Bearwise. So we're going to have to do the same thing here. And we hope then to get humans, even though we're moving, to get us behaving more consistently in bear habitat. So that's the idea behind it. And we have some community initiatives that we're starting in Asheville that I will mention when we talk about the urban suburban bear study. So there are 6 principles to this, and you probably know them already, but we're using the same language, same symbols, and I'll talk in detail about each of these 6 in the next few minutes. So never feed or approach bears. I hope that is obvious, but in the moment, you might not think so much about it. So the lady's video where she did do the right thing in yelling at the bear, I will say it would have been better if she had been inside her house yelling at the bear, because he could move pretty quickly. He could have lunged at her. So I am not suggesting that you come out 10 feet from a bear. The lady before that should not have been doing what she was doing. It is dangerous to be that close to a bear, and certainly a bear over a food source. That's never a good idea. So, and don't feed a bear intentionally or unintentionally. We are never, ever, ever going to support feeding your leftover food hiking, or, from your back porch or whatever. It's a terrible idea. That goes for pretty much all wildlife. That's not a good idea. Secure food and garbage. And I've got a couple of slides about this in a second, but I know that can be difficult to secure your garbage. So we'll talk about some options. Remove bird feeders. Again, I'm going to expand on this, but our request now is, if you are in an area with bears, which pretty much is Buncombe County, not to have bird feeders, pretty much at all. Don't leave pet food out. So if you have pets outside, put the food out and then bring it back in quickly. Cleaning grills and letting neighbors know. Those are the 6 sections of BearWise, the 6 tenets of BearWise, and I'm going to go into those in detail. So intentional or non-intentional feeding is a problem. We see it happening everywhere. And bird seed, natural food, not natural food, none of it is a good idea, because bears are extremely smart and they learn that you are providing that food. So the reason that those agricultural fields at the coast, even though they are human provided food in the sense that we are growing that food, they are not connecting that food came from us. To them, it's just wild food because they're roaming around and they're not interacting with people. But feeding them off your porch, feeding them in your yard, whether you intend for it or not, the bear is going to associate you with that food source. When it sees you near that food source, they're going to make that connection. Bears can break into one bird feeder and get food and can associate, or a cooler. There are tons of studies done in Yosemite and Yellowstone where bears learn that vans have more food than any other car, because there tends to be kids who drops food and stuff all down in the seats, and they can get access to it. So they'll break into a van before any other car. And they've learned that bird feeders provide a lot of food. So if I found a bird feeder here, I'll just go find that same thing somewhere else and I'll get a food source. Not all animals can make those associations, but bears can. Securing food and garbage. Our goal, the golden standard, is to not have garbage accessible to bears ever. Now, if you go to work at 7 o'clock in the morning and your trash pickup doesn't come until noon, then your trash is going to be out there because you're not home to wait to put it out until the trash truck comes. We totally understand that. We want you to do everything you can within your power to make sure that bears don't have access to that garbage. So try your best to put it out as late as possible. Please don't put it out the night before, for sure. Wild bears prefer to come out at dusk and dawn when it's quiet and they're still a little camouflaged and nobody's out and about. Bears that are food conditioned are coming out in the middle of the day, walking down 240, they don't care. So your food certainly has less access to, less bears have access to it the later you can put it out in the day. If you have the option, you can buy bear resistant containers, and the BearWise website has a running list, this list right here, of containers that we have tested with Asheville City and Buncombe County trucks to make sure that they can be used with those trucks. But not all cans work with all trucks. Some neighborhoods have trucks where one man is driving the truck and there, or woman, and there is an arm that that comes out to pick up the truck, to pick up the trash can and dump it into the truck, and they never get out of the car. Some bear resistant trash cans work with that system and some don't. Some neighborhoods just have a pickup truck because it's such a small roads in that neighborhood that then picks, someone gets out of that and puts trash into the back of the pickup truck. So you would just need to call your waste services provider and see if you were going to purchase a cart, see if your cart would work before you buy the cart. They are expensive. And so we know that that is not an issue for everyone. They can be close to $300 and then $300 to ship them. So if you are in the city of Asheville and if you are in Buncombe County, both waste services providers are trying to work with their town councils, board of aldermen, to figure out an equitable and realistic way to provide bear resistant trash cans to their citizens. Maybe it ends up being a rental system. They're looking into grants. We've been working for them hard for at least 2, maybe 3 years now, trying to figure out what is going to be the best solution. So know that they're trying. Know that your feedback is important. If you want this in your neighborhood, you need to tell them that you want that. And you need to know that some of the onus is going to be on you to try and help figure out the solution. There's no way that the city of Asheville or Buncombe County or most any other community has the money or the space to buy hundreds and hundreds of these cans and store them somewhere and then just give them to you for free. We wish that was the case, but it's not. So we're trying to find a middle ground. Amazon does have some retrofits for cans that are basically cables with some screws, and those are working okay. The idea is that a bear is having to work hard enough to get in the can that they lose interest and leave. If they smell food and they've never got into a can before, they might spend a little bit of time on it, but they don't know what they're getting. And so they don't know how good it is and they'll leave it. If a bear has gotten into trash before and they know how good that trash is going to be for them, as far as like calories and all this yummy stuff, then they'll fight for it for a long time and they'll roll them around and bounce on them. And most retrofits are not going to hold but for so long. But retrofits are $8 or $10 potentially compared to a $500 or $600 can. I'm going to keep going, but I know we'll have a bunch of questions on that, so we can come back to it. Bird feeders, we used to say, time of year, you can put them out this time or that time, or when you don't see a bear for a couple of weeks, you can put it out. And in Buncombe County, Asheville City area, we are saying pretty much no bird feeders. A lot of neighborhoods in Asheville regularly have bears. You might not see them for a couple of weeks, but they'll be back. And so having bird feeders out is just too much of a risk. No matter how much people are concocting versions of bear resistant bird feeders, they get the seed left over on the ground that the bears drop. They get into the can that you're storing. Some access to seed is still going to be possible. And so we are just requesting that instead you find other ways to attract birds to your yard by what you're planting, which is actually a better food source for birds than bird seed anyway. And just to let you know the seriousness of that access to food, you probably heard about the bear incident in Swanninoa. We've also had one in Haywood County, but it was less related to food. This particular lady was in a neighborhood. They knew the neighbors across the street were putting out their trash at night, and bears were regularly getting into that trash. And they were not concerned about picking it up. So she went out to feed she went out to take her dog to the bathroom at night. She looked around and didn't see bears. And when she came out into the yard, she saw bears at the trash can. She saw cubs at the trash can. So she picked up her dog and started to walk back inside, and she didn't see the mom, who came from the side somewhere, and attacked her on the way into her house. She's okay. She thankfully was just scratched up, is about all that came out of it. But that female ended up being euthanized because she was certainly a safety risk to people at that point. And the cubs had to be relocated, and they will give that, the Wildlife Resources Commission will give that a shot if there are cubs that are small. But in most cases, bears don't get relocated because they already have the bad behavior. They're just going to move that bad behavior somewhere else. There are a lot of other reasons we don't relocate, but pretty much it doesn't solve anything to move a bear. But we have given it a shot in certain cases with cubs. So just know, having access to trash and bird feeders caused this attack. The lady did nothing wrong. In fact, she did everything right. She turned her lights on before she went out. She looked around before she went out. She picked her dog up quickly. She did not run. She walked back into her house and still was hurt. So just know it's a responsibility that we have to take seriously. Not leaving pet food outdoors. If you keep pets outside, try to feed them in a window, whatever, an hour, 30 minutes, whatever, put the food out that you need for them, and then bring that food back in. You do the best that you can with that. I know, we were talking about chickens earlier. I know there's some animals you just have food available to them during the day, but as best as you can, just decreasing the chances that a bear has access to that food is what we are asking you to do. A lot of beekeepers have really good luck with electric fences. And the gist is that you bait the fence with something that is attractive to the bear. So the bear gets shocked on a sensitive part, like its nose. It's not killing it, or it's not even hurting it. It's just annoying it. But if the bear walks into the fence with their side or something, their fat is so thick and their fur so thick, they might not care. So you want their first reaction to be a very negative one with an electric fence. And then beekeepers seem to have really good luck just having that around their beehives. Cleaning a grill. This can be hard. It can be a pain, but ideally, again, that gold standard is to try and clean your grill and the grease trap every time you use it. Even better if you have a place you can wheel your grill into, like a garage or an inside porch or something. When you're not using it, that is even better. Again, we know that's not the case for everybody, but we ask that you try the best that you can, because they will get access to it. And then a big thing we are finding that's working really, really well is just letting your neighbors know. Next door, Facebook, email, text, there's tons of ways that neighborhoods now communicate with each other for a lot of reasons. And so we are asking that you get with your neighbors and you figure out a system where you can quickly let each other know. Because if you're going out to work in the morning and you see a bear, and then you're hollering at your neighbors to say, hey, by the way, there's a bear outside, there's less chance for a spooky, interaction of like coming around the corner of your car and running into the bear. You can also be more diligent that day. Okay, I'm not gonna, I'm gonna bring the dog inside for the day instead of keeping it outside, or whatever the case might be. And we are working with some communities to implement BearWise as a community. And that's pretty tough because not everybody wants to do everything together. That I understand that. But if communities that are having some severe bear problems will go in together and all agree to some of the same standards, I'm not going to put feed out all day long. I'm not going to have bird feeders, etc. We have seen it in other places. We hope that we will see bears' natural daily patterns change and they will move out of those areas. And basically, we want you to know that bears in your neighborhood is not necessarily a bad thing if they are wandering through, but we don't want them lingering. We certainly don't want them thinking that you are providing food for them. And when it boils down to it, the old saying, a fed bear is a dead bear, is still a very true saying today. We don't like it. We do not like having to euthanize a bear for no reason. A bear that's being harvested during hunting season is feeding families, and that's different. Shooting a bear just because you made it behave badly is not okay. But we also cannot risk the safety of our citizens if we have a bear that we know is acting aggressively, and we will have to go in and euthanize the bear. And that has happened. It doesn't happen a ton, but it has happened. If you encounter a bear, whether you're hiking in your house, in your backyard, this is also on the Bearwise website. We have lots of flyers that you can print off and share with your neighbors or friends or whoever. You basically want to just get out of the area. Don't run, because like a dog or any other predator, that usually elicits a predator response, and they want to chase you. So don't run, but just back away. And you have the right in your yard, or when you're hiking, you can haze a bear. We're not going to okay you shooting a bear, but throwing rocks towards the bear, or yelling or screaming, or making yourself seem big and nasty, and you're meaner than the bear is, will scare off the bear if it's a wild bear. So that is okay for you to do. You can yell and scream and make it miserable. We also tell neighbors, if you don't want the bear in your yard, that's totally your right. If you want to imagine some sort of barrier in your yard that's the bear, the bear's okay here, the bear is not okay here. Maybe it's your fence line, maybe it's the wood line. But you, especially if you're at home quite often when bears are around, you can regularly haze a bear, and sometimes they learn. The problem is most people are not at their homes all the time to be able to do that kind of consistent hazing. But there are campgrounds that, have been able to have staff available to regularly haze bears. And bears learn that they can't come into the campground, but they can be in the woods around the campground. And that's pretty effective as long as food is also put up. So hazing is not a bad thing if you are not hurting the bear, but harassing is okay. Last couple of slides is on the urban suburban bear study, and then I will go back to answering some questions. So if you haven't heard about it yet, there are 2 phases to this urban suburban bear study. There are graduate students from NC State University who are working with us, the Wildlife Resources Commission, to study bears in the city limits of Asheville. And basically, this first started in 2014 as a general idea of trying to figure out, are these bears that we see in Asheville staying in Asheville all the time? Or because Asheville's kind of in a bowl, in a sense, where we have a lot of protected property on the ridge lines around Asheville, the Parkway, Mount Mitchell State Park is not far, Asheville Reservoir, there are a lot of Pisgah National Forest. There are a lot of areas where they are not developed and bears can roam around in there. So there was first thought that maybe bears were really living there, but then just kind of coming down through those natural roads and trails, et cetera, into Asheville, getting food, hanging out a little bit, but they're probably going back. So this first 4 years was pretty much collaring a bunch of bears, mostly females, because females kind of make up where everybody else is roaming from. Those cubs, are then going to disperse from the mom. We're not collaring cubs because they grow too fast. So we'll collar the female. It has it's radio tracking, so we can track her within the city limits of Asheville. They're getting a signal from those collars every 15 minutes. And then outside of the city of Asheville, it's every hour, I think. So we had really good tabs on all the bears that were collared. Collaring is very expensive. So I think at any one point there might have been 40 bears or so that were collared, but we can't collar every one of them anyway, even if we wanted to be able to do that. This was all done on private property. Homeowners gave permission to put a culvert trap, which you can see in the left-hand corner there, on their property. And that culvert trap is baited. And when the bear goes in there and starts to pull on that bait, then it drops the door and the bear is inside of that culvert trap. There are holes in there so they can breathe. Normally those bears didn't sit in there long before the homeowner was calling the researchers saying, hey, we got a bear. So, they're not left long, but they are able to go in and give the bear some medicine to make it go to sleep. They're able to pull that bear out and weigh it, check its health, put typically an ear tag on it so it can be tracked. They often tattoo the inside of their lip, and that way if the ear collar goes off, they always have a way to track that bear. And if needed, they put a collar on it. They can take tissue samples, all of that very, very quickly. There's someone monitoring the breath rate and everything of the bear to make sure it's okay while they're doing that. And then they haze the bear a little bit. They want it gone. So when they wake that bear up, they're running it off into the woods again. And we are able to then keep track of those bears even when we don't have a collar on them anymore. If that bear is then captured later on in some survey work, or harvested or hit by car, whatever the case might be, if we come across that bear again, we can compare the data that they take at that point to any previous data we have. From that research, we learned that bears are living in Asheville all the time. And sometimes they're staying in one neighborhood between a handful of houses because the food is that good. And they're able to den under a house or den in a tree or somewhere and tolerate all the noise. And it's a great adaptation to have, but not great for us in the sense that they get way too accustomed to people. I don't know if anybody's asking it, but sometimes people ask about the blindfold. When bears are anesthetized, just like with people, your eyes don't make tears in the same way, and they don't want their eyes to dry out. So it's also calming them down, but it also protects their eyes while they're, from sun and everything else while they're working on them. So the phase 2, that was phase 1. We learned, oh yeah, they're living in Asheville and they're getting a whole lot of food and they're getting really fat really quick. We had cubs who are 1.5 years old, and they should have been around 80 pounds or so maybe, and they were over 200 pounds. So know that this is no small issue. If I haven't said it before, they're getting enough food that they're putting on potentially 3 times the weight they should be as a cub. So the new phase 2, all we can say is COVID. COVID messed up everything, but what is supposed to be happening, and we're a little delayed on this plan because we pretty much didn't get to do much this year, is now we're tracking these bears again. And you can see in the map on the right-hand side, each color represents a bear. And we are tracking them within the city limits. Again, that smaller 15 or 20 minute signal versus the hour or so if they go outside of the city limits. And that's just a battery life thing. We can't, we have to save those collars as much as we can. So we don't need a signal constantly if they are moving out into the woods outside of Asheville most of the time. So sometimes they're roaming pretty far. But in a lot of cases, if I zoomed that map in many cases, those bears are really just hunkered down in Asheville. And that 15-minute message is also helping us do a couple of things. If we see a bear that for an hour, a couple of hours isn't moving anywhere, he might be napping or she might be napping, but they also might be getting into trouble. And so they will send out a research technician to that site and see what's happening. Is this a good food source? Is this a bird feeder? Is this trash? Is this a good den site? And they can keep record of that. And then they are able to take tissue samples, and we are figuring out how much of a bear's diet is human provided foods, how much of a bear's diet is natural foods, and is that impacting, which we think it is, how many cubs they're having, how often they're having them, and what is their general behavior because of the amount of human provided foods they're getting. We are also, now that we have implemented this BearWise program, we are also hoping to evaluate the impact of BearWise education. So surveys will end up going out at some point during this survey, during this research window. And trying to see, as we are tracking these bears, we hope that the more this message gets out, the more we see our bears start to move out of these neighborhoods because they are getting less access to food. Final results should be potentially somewhere around 2023. It might get delayed because of this year. Ashley Hobbs is the technician on this project, and her contact information is right there. You might want to screenshot it. You also have the information for our wildlife helpline. Someone asked earlier about what if I have a problem and I need to call someone. So this wildlife helpline and the wildlife helpline's email address is on that page right there. And if it is a problem that is not an immediate issue on the weekend, then calling that wildlife helpline is your first, our request that you do that first. Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, that is manned by staff who can answer questions. That is also how we are able to get data like, how many calls we had in Buncombe County versus the other counties. So we would prefer everything get filtered there. And then if it is at night or on the weekend and you can't get anyone, we do have the Wildlife Enforcement Division has a searchable website, and you can search where you are and the enforcement officer that you need to contact. I am requesting that you use that as your last resource. Our enforcement officers do get called a lot on a lot of things, and it's difficult for them to do the shift work that they need to do, and then also answer just questions and concerns. So please reserve looking up an enforcement officer and calling them to a real safety issue. If it can wait, please use the helpline instead. And then if you have bear issues related to this study or to urban suburban, the urban suburban bear study, you can email Ashley or leave her a message at that phone number. And this is also just a couple of things. We don't have time to play it, but I want to mention to you that you have these resources. Again, maybe screenshot this or take a picture with your phone. We have a neat video on bear research that was done through this urban suburban bear study. It's about 7 minutes long, but you can see a winter den check. And so the biologist with the collar went and tracked this female into her den with her cubs, and they were able to safely anesthetize her so that they could weigh her, check the cubs, all the things they needed to do. And they took our videographer along so you can see what's happening. So it's kind of a neat behind the scenes video. And then we also have a wildlife email update system. Anybody can add their email address on this website, and you will get our updates from the Wildlife Resources Commission about anything related to North Carolina wildlife that our agency would put out. And I think those come out, might even be monthly, weekly, something like that. It's not a daily email. All right, so I'm going to go to questions again, and I might have lost track because we've had a lot of stuff come in, but let's see if I can back up a little bit. Oh, bear hunting seasons and rules. So if you go to ncwildlife.org/bear, you will get our bear page, and that has 30 plus years of research on it. It also has our bear seasons by management units across the state. So we have a bear management unit, a Piedmont management unit, and a coastal bear management unit. Typically, every county is a little bit different, or every unit is a little bit different, but typically bear season runs from November to January, not the whole time in all of those counties. Sometimes they close, like here in the mountains, we get a window and then it closes for a little bit and then the window opens back up. So without getting into way too much detail, we have bear season set up so that if a female is pregnant or has cubs, she's in a den, and she and those cubs are not at risk for being harvested during bear season. So that's why the season is the way it is in the wintertime. And a bear hunter can only harvest one bear every year. And all of those limits and rules and maps and everything are on our website. You have my email address too, so I can always connect you to that too if you have trouble. Carrying bear spray. Yes, we do recommend it. We also recommend that you know how to use it. One reason that it took so long for agencies to start encouraging bear spray is because what was happening was people didn't know what they were doing and they were spraying themselves, or they had it way down in a backpack and you couldn't get access to it anyway, but they thought they had bear spray with them, so they were safe. And so they had earphones in and weren't paying, it just made people let their guard down because they thought, well, I have bear spray, so I'm okay. So what we are asking is absolutely, there's no reason not to carry bear spray. It's not hurting anything to have it, but you can't assume that because you have it, you can just tune out when you're out in the woods by yourself or, walking in the dark in your neighborhood or something. You need to have it on you, on your waist belt or carrying it or something so you can get access to it quickly. You need to have sprayed it on your own beforehand somewhere that's safe to make sure you know how to use it, because there is a safety switch on it. You also need to know if you think in a scary situation, you can think clearly enough to use it, because if you spray it and you're in the wind and it's coming towards you, you're going to spray yourself. It's capsaicin, so it's just mace, much stronger. So it just is going to kind of defeat the purpose. Bears frequent decks and garages even. Is it safe to leave doors and windows open? I mean, I would say that if you're in an area where bears are out, all times a day and you have lots of issues with bears, I wouldn't be cooking with the windows open. You sitting on the screened-in porch and you're chatting with friends and, hanging out should be fine. If you're sitting out there by yourself and it's quiet, you just need to be aware that, you need to be looking around so you're not spooking a bear. But there's no reason not to enjoy having your windows open. Just know if you have lots of bear issues versus like you might never see a bear, you need to change your behavior a little bit. We have just a couple of minutes, so let me see. Bird feed 10 or 12 feet off the ground. It doesn't matter. They'll bend steel poles. So that doesn't necessarily help. There were a lot of things last year about bears showing up without a leg. We did a lot of, we had a lot of enforcement officers doing a lot of time in and around Asheville, along with our biologists. There were game cameras up. There was, all of our researchers for the urban suburban bear study. And we found no justification for the stories about traps and bears getting their legs caught. Bears do get hit by cars quite often because they will go to edges of road for roadkill, like other animals will, or crossing a road to get to somewhere else. And they often do step out and then a car comes by and they jump back. And it isn't uncommon to have a front or back leg get caught by a car, but not get the whole animal. And then, if you have a part of your body that is hurt or broken or not working, it eventually atrophies and falls off, but often it can heal over. And so there are bears with 3 legs or with a leg that doesn't work. And there's not tons of them, but there are certainly some, and they are doing fine. But that's why those are happening, not that someone is trapping and cutting off paws. That we can tell. We've done, like I said, lots and lots of hours of research on that. Parks and picnic areas encourage us to use them. How risky? Are there frequent incidents of bears coming to those sites and getting aggressive with people? There are sites like the chimneys in the park and Craggy, where people picnic and are sloppy with their food. And certainly those have been closed at times during the year because bears are getting too comfortable being there because they're getting food. So if you're using those picnic areas and people are picking up their food, they're fine. There's no reason not to be there. But if people are being sloppy and throwing down food and hiking and leaving their food at their campsite or whatever, that's when those issues are gonna happen. Using compost piles. If you have bears that are frequently in your area, I would suggest not using a compost pile, just putting leaves and things in compost, but not food. And people are asking about putting stuff on your trash can like ammonia or things like that. Pretty much the issue is if a bear knows it's a good source, they're going to keep it. So you want to never have access to those trash cans. Once they know there's food in it, a smell is not going to deter them.
Tanya, there were a couple questions about a decrease in the number of complaints in Buncombe County. So since there were a couple of those, can you address that about why?
Sure, yeah, I missed those. Thank you. I think that was related to those two maps, that year 18 and 19. So if I'm not mistaken, I'd have to go back and double check. The winter of 2017-18, we had a hard mast failure, which means all the nuts and acorns, it was just a really bad year for those. That happens pretty often. It's not a strange occurrence or anything. It's pretty normal for the Southeast even. And certainly for our mountains, we see that happen. So some years just, they don't get as big and fat. And so they cause more trouble quicker in the spring.
Let's see.
Someone's asking about the recording being available.
Yes, and there will be one on, it's going to go on YouTube. They're working on how to do that recording. So just pay attention on the newsletter, and you can check the website for that. But that's a great question.
And
Also,
asking about the bear population. So the way that we are able, I wish we could do it by drones because that actually would be really nice. But you can do that in places like herds out west. Sometimes that works. But the way that we are able to get population estimates is a mark recapture. So I mentioned that they have ear tags or tattoos. And as we are capturing bears and we're recording that data, they have a system for how often they do that and how many they try to capture in any one survey window. And based on how many we capture that we've not captured before versus how many we capture that we have captured before, they can start to, there's a math formula, and they can start to put in, that data into that formula and get an estimate of how many bears. It's a rough estimate, but it's the best system for getting population estimates for most animals. Food source affect cub production. That's part of that urban suburban bear study. But what we are starting to see, so it's not finalized yet, is of course, the fatter and healthier a mom is, the more cubs she's going to have. That's pretty much what it boils down to. So our urban bears in Asheville are getting big and fat and happy, and so they'll have more babies. We think that's going to be the case, but we don't have all the final data on that yet. Female with 5 cubs in Beaver Dam. I'm not familiar with her specifically. Ashley might be, so you could email her. But 5 cubs is not unusual, especially in the great habitat that we have here in North Carolina. 2 to 3 cubs is pretty average for North Carolina, but 5 is not unheard of. Brand of bear spray. There isn't really a recommended brand. There are only a couple of brands that are out there for the most part. The biggest thing you want to look at, there are 2 sizes typically. So you just need to decide which size you would prefer. But really, you're only going to use bear spray. I mean, do understand using bear spray is the last resort. So you have all these opportunities to be loud when you're out and walking so that the bear knows you're coming and it can run off, right? You could spook it once you see it and get it to run off. Bear spray does not spray that far intentionally. Each can sprays a little bit different, but that is oh crap, the bear is 5 feet from me. I've got to get it away. I'm going to spray the bear spray at that point. And there are videos online that show you how to spray it. So make sure that you just do your research, due diligence on that. And why allow hunting when bears can be killed by cars? Well, because we would prefer they not be killed by cars. It doesn't always kill the bear, certainly damages the car. It's a safety risk. So we would prefer that bears stay in the woods, and managing that population where they don't need to come out along roads is certainly our preference. If there's enough habitat, enough good habitat, and a population size that's manageable in the woods, then that's where we want them to be. And we don't have another way to manage that population besides hunting. So allowing these hunters, we set a percentage of bears that can be harvested and still maintain our population. And they don't meet that. even in a good season, they're still not harvesting the number of bears we know we could have harvested and maintain our bear population. And we would rather them be able to be used for food and be killed quickly, basically, in the woods versus getting hit by a car and all the terrible things that come along with that. All right. Anything else, Jane, you see that I missed?
Oh,
We're at 1 o'clock.
great questions. There's are a couple. When does bear behavior go to a nuisance level that must be addressed?
Pretty much if you can't scare off a bear, then it is becoming a nuisance. Some nuisance bears are showing a ton of restraint, and that doesn't mean that their behavior is okay, but they have just chosen to tolerate being around humans. We just don't know that that behavior might go south the next interaction. So we consider a nuisance when they are getting really tolerant and not being run off. It doesn't mean that bear would have to be euthanized. It just means that we are now considering that bear no longer a wild, easily spooked bear.
And I have lots of friends who walk their dogs. And what would you do if someone's walking their dog, you encounter a bear and the dog starts to get aggressive? Or is there anything that you would recommend? It says, while walking my fear aggressive dog. So
Yeah, I would definitely, the more noise you make while you're walking, you know, any sort of bell, I mean, they have specific bear bells, but it doesn't matter. Any sort of bell or singing or talking or whatever when you're walking so the bear has time to react to you is ideal. Certainly having your dog on leash is safer than having it off leash. And if you do spook a bear and your dog is barking, if it's a wild bear and it's not cornered, if you are in an area where you've got this bear, you know, cornered into something, you and your dog need to back away so that it feels like it has a place to run.
another one is, what sounds do bears make? And is there any way from hearing their sounds you can tell what they might do? Because
Oh, that's a good one. I took out, there's so much I could talk about. We just don't have enough time. They do make a lot of sounds. Babies make this like machine purring sound when they're nursing. It's really cute. You can look it up online. But adults do growl and chomp their teeth like when they're mad and huff. And so typically, if you are getting too close to a bear or a bear is feeling threatened by you, you'll see those false charges. Not that you're going to know that when it's happening, but they often will bluff charge a couple of times. You'll hear the teeth chomping or the huffing. They'll pant. You don't get the same physical reactions like you would a dog. You know, they don't have a tail or ears that are big enough to really lay down or anything like that. But you do get some of the huffing and the panting and chomping when they're feeling cornered or irritated. They can growl, yeah, as well.
okay. This one is, if you see a bear, that doesn't necessarily, are we supposed to report it to you?
No, seeing a bear is not a bad thing at all. It's pretty cool, actually. I mean, I know so much of this talk is about the bad side of, you know, being careful, but it's pretty neat to see a bear. It's pretty awesome, in fact, to see a bear. It's just that we want our bears to stay wild. So we want them, you know, coming through neighborhoods, but they hear a car or hear you yelling, they run off. That's what we want. But seeing them is totally fine.
Well, I am looking at these. Oh, here's one. How has the bear hunting culture changed? I know you wanted to bring that one.
Bear hunting culture. So it probably, I don't know about changed necessarily, but I will say here in North Carolina, whether you like bear hunting or not, we do have some pretty deep roots in bear hunting. The Plot Hound is our state dog, and it was bred right here in Haywood County in Western North Carolina as a bear hunting dog by a German family way back when, 1800s. So bear hunting with dogs didn't necessarily originate here, but certainly for the Southeast, for Western North Carolina specifically, its epicenter is here. On the East Coast, most of the time, bear hunters are not using dogs, but in the western part of the state, a lot of our bear hunters use dogs. And there are some training seasons that happen earlier in August or so, where they are training dogs before bear hunting season opens. But that culture is pretty deep rooted, a couple hundred years of bear hunting for sure. And we do see more, I will say, I have heard more bear hunters. It is a lot of work. It isn't often something that someone does if they're hunting with dogs. Typically, they're not on their own. They're with a couple of other people, and they can roam miles and miles and miles and spend days and never harvest a bear. So it's not a very easy way to hunt. Not that any hunting is a very easy way to hunt, but it takes a lot of work. And so we do have some bear hunters who, as they've gotten older, they are less concerned unless they absolutely have to have that meat for their family. A lot of them have started trying to train younger kids, get them outdoors more. Some of them said they've even switched to just photography and wanting to see the bears, but don't have to have that need anymore. And so they don't harvest them. So I'm not sure what the perspective is from the community who's not involved with bear hunting a lot, but there is a lot of hype and a lot of work, but not a lot of harvest compared to the amount of work.
There was a question about someone who lives in a bear area and wants to know whether they should have a vegetable garden or not. It was one of the earlier questions.
Oh yeah, that's a really good question. If you are seeing bears a lot, I would say probably not. It wouldn't be worth it. If you don't have bears all the time, give it a shot. Maybe try something small at first and see if they react to it. That's a hard question to answer because I just don't know how often you're seeing bears. But if you're seeing them quite often, I would say no.
Great.
All right, well, I think we probably have to wrap it up here in a minute, but Tanya, if you want to let folks know how they can get in touch with you, I see your email is there.
Absolutely.
And we're happy to put the website in the chat box. We're going to put that website in there so folks can copy and paste it.
Yes. Website and my email address, and I'm happy to answer more questions. I appreciate that there were so many questions and people are so interested in bears, and I'm happy to talk with folks later if there are concerns that I didn't address here today. Thanks for having me.
You did a fabulous job. There are lots of comments, positive comments in the Q&A section, and I sure learned a lot. I hope we can have you do this again, and I appreciate you putting your email in there. I don't know if we can talk about this later. If you want me to just copy some of these questions and you might be able to talk to them later, I don't know. So, but we can work on that later. But
Sure.
Thank you, everyone. I mean, I think everyone stayed for the whole
All
press.
right, we are still live.
Okay, sorry.
So thank you all for attending, and please copy Tanya's email if you have any further questions, and we hope to see you next week.
Thanks, everyone.